Hi, colleagues. I hope you are well. It's still a very blessed uh, evening. I hope everybody is well. I hope we are having some tea just to keep us warm during this cold weather. We're now starting to see winter coming through, and we saw some rain here within Johannesburg. Probably these are the signs that are telling us that it might get a bit colder this winter season. Thank you very much for joining us. We truly appreciate it to have you here and taking the time to be with us here. And I would like to also thank our esteemed guest members who are here with us for joining us, for being able to also take the time to be with us during this evening. We know that they might be having some of their own personal things that they should be covering, but they did say and put their hand up to say, no, we'll be able to come and then assist to just give some perspective, and put some practice into economics that we are learning in different classes, as it were. So, with that being said, I will be your host. My name is Luyanda Mjoki. I'm a general manager here at the Genesis Business School. I'll be hosting this session. Thank you very much for joining us, colleagues. What will then happen, colleagues, in terms of the structure of the sessions? I will do the opening remarks, and then I will have my esteemed guest speakers to be able to share some different perspective in different themes that I will be posing questions then to them, and then we'll open it up to the floor in terms of any questions and for esteemed guest speakers to be able to then address them. And then we'll have some closing remarks and, final touches from our esteemed guest speakers. So thank you very much. Please take the time to be with us here. If you have not made your cup of coffee, please do so very quickly as we introduce the session. So, colleagues, briefly, I will give just an overview in terms of the Economics Masterclass as we are having it here today. So one of the things that we'd like to do here is to deepen the knowledge when it comes to economics fundamentals and its application in terms of the real world and in terms of business as well as investment. So one of the things that you would learn here, colleagues, we are going to explore in terms of perspectives when it comes to monetary as well as fiscal policy, and in terms of their implications when it comes to business and in terms of our day-to-day lives and in terms of investments. We'll also try to understand some of the economic inequalities as well as unemployment and try to discuss some of the solutions in terms of addressing these challenges that are facing the country. We'll also look at some of the current economic trends as well as case studies. It could be from a local and a global perspective, and it could be shared in terms of from various companies our esteemed guests are then coming from. We'll also examine in terms of the role of microeconomics as well as macroeconomics in terms of business decisions. So allow me, colleagues, then to then introduce our esteemed guest speakers just briefly. We do have Mr. Freddie Manchel, who is a chief economist at Aluma Capital. We also have Dr. Paul Mpunga, who is a chief country economist at African Development Bank, South Africa. We also have Ms. Tandai with us. Ms. Tandai Manchumula, who is an executive in terms of strategy, support, and governance at Liberty. We also have Dr. Paulina, who's running a bit late, will also be joining us. She's also a chief economist at NAMSA. Then we have our very own facilitator, our finance facilitator, Mr. Blessing, will also be joining us shortly as well. Who will also be coming and sharing some perspective as it were. So with that being said, colleagues, I don't know if I'm leaving something from the esteemed guest. If we want to share something, share some comments as we're about to have a closing maybe questionnaire. Still all good? Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to then open the floor, colleagues, with something that we currently saw. I think we wake up to it in terms of the news today, where we are up to a very shocking or not shocking. It will depend in terms of where you're at, in terms of your perspective, in terms of the news. Following the National Assembly's debate as well as its initial adoption of the fiscal framework that was proposing a VAT increase from 15% to 15.5%, which now subsequently was then withdrawn due to public as well as political pushbacks. I want to then ask in terms of our esteemed guest speakers, in terms of what are the implications of this reversal, and in their own views, what does this indicate in terms of the stability of the government when it comes to also in terms of their decision-making capacity? I will just allow maybe any of our esteemed guest speakers to take this particular question because it's very new. I know we just recently woken up to this particular news. Anyone from our guest speakers would like to take this question? I see Mr. Ndai, you would want to share with us?
The first name is actually Tendani, not Tendai.
Oh, Tendani. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for correcting that.
I think I just want to give a perspective from both the business side and in terms of what you said earlier about the macroeconomic perspective. In one sense, you could say in terms of the GNU, it shows that there's robust debate and they can challenge each other and come up to a consensus. But in terms of perception of fiscal stability and what we've been used to since 1994, this is the first time ever that we have seen a toing and froing in terms of fiscal policy and the framework that the government puts forward. We first saw the suspension of the tabling of the budget 2 hours before it was supposed to. A lot of people are already in the studio to analyze what is going to be. And we knew that the leakage was like VAT was the pain point. When they tabled it again, 12th of March, the understanding was that they've gone through the what they needed to do in terms of what Treasury does with the deputy minister who's coming from the DA as well. So the fact that they withdrew it now, and I'm not convinced in terms of the gap, how they're going to fill the shortfall of about upwards of 70 billion rand in terms of what that 0.5% this year and next year is going to do. What is that going to do to the finances? What is that going to do in terms of what the minister said in terms of where we will be in terms of the debt to GDP ratio, the revenue generation. And unfortunately for him, we're looking at an economy that might weaken, and the best effort of SARS in terms of collecting revenue might be challenged simply because global events that are beyond our control might lead us not for the economy not to grow as it should, and so the revenue is already going to be challenged. I'm worried about that, and I'm worried about what the impact is going to be in terms of the rating agencies. We've seen the rand weaken already today, so that's not good news for South Africa. In terms of business, because I come from business, so when the minister announces an increase in VAT, you have to adjust your system. And it's not only where I come from, but generally for business. You have to adjust your system to accommodate for that increase in VAT. That was already done. People were ready to go live because it was supposed to start on the 1st of May. So the cost of doing that and then reversing it for business is a lot. And it's money that has gone down the drain because that's not going to happen. It's simply not good enough. You need fiscal policy to be predictable. Business needs certainty so that they can know, okay, we're going to ramp up the system to cater for a 0.5 percentage point in addition to what the VAT was last year. So I just think the uncertainty is not good for the economy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tendai, for your inputs there. I think more or less she was indicating in terms of the worry in relation to the stability of the fiscal policy areas where, and in terms of the revenue that the country will then generate, whether there might be a shortfall or the minister might find ways in terms of sourcing that gap of those particular funds. Thank you so much for those submissions. Is there maybe any esteemed guest from the floor would want to then share with us their own perspective?
Well, I don't think it's only about the robustness of the debate why the government rescinded the 0.5% VAT. I think there's more to it than just a robust debate. I think we know about the polls that came out last week and about the popularity of who's polling the most votes if we go to the polls now. And I think that also played a huge part in the decision in the end, because we know that it's assumed that VAT have a greater effect on the destitute and say less fortunate households than on more affluent households. So because it's a regressive tax system. So I guess that played a huge part as well. I don't think it's necessarily the robustness of the debate. In terms of plugging the hole, I guess government should cut spending. I guess that's the big elephant in the room. We can't go on borrowing. If you listen to the IMF and World Bank and the international sources, we are at a place where even the institutions start finding it hard, South Africa hard sell, given our tax system and the robustness of our tax system. So that becomes problematic in itself. So we need to address the elephant in the room, and that's basically how do we address government spending without creating, let's say, social upheaval within South Africa, and that it might cause. In the end, it boils down to me, if I look at it from an economic perspective, between the government, whether it's the GNU or ANC-led government, is between a rock and a hard place. You've got on the one side the people that are dependent on social grants, which is a big drain on the fiscus, and then you've got on the other hand the middle class, which is mostly beholden by government employees. So now, if you run out of financial funds, which side are you not going to pay? If you decide not to do the social programs, it means that your country might end up looking like the KZN riots in July of 2021, and that might look like a picnic. And on the other side, if you don't pay your government employees, it does have an effect on service delivery in your other hand. So I'm glad I'm not government at this stage, because our caught really in a bad place, and then our economy is not growing enough so that we can collect more tax from let's say from a leverage perspective. We know that there's a positive relationship between tax collection and economic growth. So if we grow more, we collect more taxes. The ratio is actually more than positive. So what's it called? There's a specific name that I'm thinking about. It just eludes me now. But and the converse is true. When your economy is not doing good, you also collect less taxes. So if you take inflation and you look at tax collection, you will see that government finances has been under strain for a long time, because with the same amount of money, they can do less services the next year because of the inflationary effect. But no one talks about that, because that's uncomfortable to talk about. So I'm glad I'm not government, because they're really, really in a difficult space at this stage, and it's going to take some clever maneuvering to get out of this one, let's say, alive.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Freddy. I think I'm also glad that I'm not sitting there. Maybe most of us are. And thank you so much for sharing your perspective. I think maybe to round it up, it has to do with, in terms of issues of popularity. But the decision might be taken through issues of who's now popular in terms of the polls, and probably also the other issue in terms of government spending, in terms of their willingness to then cut, from their end. I don't know if there's maybe one or two from our esteemed guest speakers would like to then share, and then we can go to our some of our questions that we would want to then pose through. Mr.
Yes, Leander, thank you very much. I think from my end, just to echo what Mr. Mitchell was just saying just now, is to say, look, it's almost like the chickens have, who always come home to roast. What do I mean? So as a government, if you keep kicking the ball of making hard decisions further down the road, it will come a point in time where you've got no other options but to make the hard decisions. So I think any government worldwide that wants to develop economically, that wants to uplift its citizens and do all the nice programs that our government is looking to do, has to make some hard calls, some hard decisions. But we have seen year in, year out that the government has shied away from that. Previously, it was because there was a majority party, so they could always vote in the budget, and they would go on either increasing taxes. So the low-hanging fruit is what the government was focused on. Now, where there's no majority, where now robust discussion has to be done, it is inevitable that someone somewhere in leadership has to make the hard calls, and those hard calls are not easy. They are not easy. Whichever side you look at it, they are not easy. They are not easy for the country. They are not easy for government, and it needs a very strong leader. So if you look at countries that have actually gone through cycles of economic development, if you look at Singapore, for Singapore to be where it is now, the leader then was vilified because he had to make very serious and very hard calls at that time. If you look Dubai again, when it started, they had to make hard calls to say, how do we manage our monies? So I think this is where we are at, to say, do we have a long-term strategy that we have, instead of just depending on low-hanging fruits, like just increasing VAT? We need to start thinking long and hard. What do we see South Africa in 20 years' time, in 10 years' time? Where should we be? And how do we like our economy to be structured? So I think those decisions, we have been kicking them down the road, and now it is time where those discussions are to be had. And I'm echoing everyone's sentiments when they say it's not very easy to be in government right now, because you really have to make it very unpopular. Whatever side you look at it, very unpopular choices. But for the good of the country, it's choices that need to be made, and choices that government needs to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blessing. It would have been nice to also, dive in terms of some of those decisions in terms of our government. We think that they are running away from, right? It would have been nice to dive and have that conversation in terms of those particular core decisions that we need to take, from a government perspective, so that we ensure that we solidify in terms of our economic growth and so forth. So, colleagues, I don't know if maybe there is also another submission before then we move on.
Yeah, if you allow just 1 minute, I wanted to indicate what the implication in terms of numbers is like. Last year, we saw the fiscal deficit at about 5% of GDP. And now with the reduced revenue from the withdrawal of this tax, they are increasing the tax, we'll see an increase in the fiscal deficit. And that means, like my colleagues are saying, the need to look back and say, how are we going to spend what we collect? It will also require looking at how to make public expenditure more efficient to reach the intended targets, and to make public expenditure actually support growth. Even with the lower revenue generation, the public expenditure needs to be looked at more carefully. It's a point for self-reflection as a country, as a government, to see how fiscal public expenditure is supporting growth. And don't forget, this is coming at a point when there is aid cut for health spending. It's coming at a point when there are challenges with the tariffs, which are going to impact trade. The key agricultural products that are going to the US and AGOA will be impacted. So it's an important point for the government to say, wait a minute, how do we continue supporting the economy with all these issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. Really appreciate it. And it will be it's also interesting take in terms of, while the government is cutting spending, how do you now look at it from how the government spending also supports in terms of economic growth? Thank you very much for that take. Truly appreciate it. And Mr. Freddy, I would like to then put this particular question then to you in terms of some of the economic policies that are there. I would want you to share, some perspectives in terms of the current trends that are shaping the South African monetary policy, and how might these impact a business confidence, as it were now?
Sure. I am not a monetarist. Let me put it bluntly. I am personally, as an economist, I understand the rationale behind interest rates and inflation and what's the rationale behind it. But for me, that's, just to put it this way, if you have a hammer in your in your toolbox, everything looks like a nail, and that's not necessarily the best tool. And if you need maybe a wrench or a let's say a shifting in South African terms. So I do think that the Reserve Bank has been a bit too hawkish on interest rates, given that we have really low inflation in South Africa, and we haven't had demand, say from a consumer's perspective, for a very long time in terms of, if you look at it in real terms, demand has been stagnant. People are facing hardships. We know that economically speaking, the cost of living has gone up, and people's salaries haven't kept abreast. So having a restrictive monetary policy do affect demand in general in the economy. If you just look at the trend in the last, say, 24 to 36 months. That being said, I wrote today about the producer price inflation, and earlier in the week on consumer inflation. That's really low. It borders on deflation. And if there's one thing that monetary policy committees or reserve banks are worried about is inflation, but what wakes them up at night with cold sweat is deflation. And that's the thing that the Japanese government has struggled for a long time with deflation, and how to get the inflation going again. Now, I'm not saying we're close to deflation. I'm just saying we are at a very low trajectory if you look at inflation. So the restrictive nature of interest rates does not help us to, say, foster a bit of demand. I'm not talking about excessive demand. And you also see that in let's say the house prices. If you look at where we were at the peak, when if you look at the private sector credit extension, how our monetary policy was accommodative in terms of the middle class buying houses, and how the number looked at when there was some COVID relief as well, and lower interest rates. So that actually helped the market. And now we passed the COVID relief, and we passed COVID and everything, and you will see the major asset acquisitions remain low for the private sector or for households. That's really concerning for me. So I really do believe that there's some space in South Africa to say lower the interest rate a bit, and to see whether we can get some demand in the economy. I'm not talking about excessive demand. And in any case, if you talk about demand or you talk about interest rates as a way to combat or curb inflation, my question is, how does interest rates really compensate for administered price increases, which is above and beyond inflation? If you talk about electricity price increases, you look at water, and you look at the rates and taxes that households pay for services within municipalities, and then also for external shocks, let's say oil price or the rand depreciating. The rand depreciates. In our case, it's not. If you look at, let's say, South Africa's currency as an emerging market against other emerging markets in the dollar, you will see that ours tend to be a bit more volatile, because our government, I think it was Mr. Blessing who said it's now time for some hard decisions, and they kick the can down the road. And that decisions and some not so, let me put it mildly, clever policy decisions by them in the last, say, 8-9 years haven't helped the currency to a situation where the average Joe says, listen, it's a demand-driven inflation that we saw. That was something that's beyond the control of consumers. And yeah, having an interest rate that's restrictive it's not necessarily going to bring down prices. In fact, you reduce demand to such a point that we now basically have a stagnant economy for the last, say, 24 months, if you just look at the data. So I'm not a monetarist. I do believe there's a space for interest rates when you have hot demand or excessive demand, but when there's no demand in the economy and you need some stimulation, I guess there's room for some interest rate adjustment to the downward side, and see if we can get the economy a bit rolling or the gears cracking again.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Freddy. Truly appreciated. And I want to then pose this question to Dr. Paul. In terms of your perspective, in terms of, if you can share from your perspective, in terms of the role that the fiscal policy then plays when it comes to driving inclusive economic growth in African economies. What role does the fiscal policy then plays in terms of ensuring that we have that inclusive economic growth, from an African economy's perspective?
Thank you so much, Mr. Rianda. Fiscal policy, as it is about taxing and spending from the public side, plays a very critical role in the economy in terms of supporting growth, in terms of supporting employment generation, etc. And linked to what Fred was saying, the two policies, both fiscal policy and monetary policy, are they are the key tenets of macroeconomic management. And the coordination between these two policies is very, very important. On the side of the fiscal policy, you are talking about taxing the population, taxing private sector. So the government is taking resources that are otherwise should be in the hands of the private sector, taking them up to support, to provide what are public goods, or common goods that are important for the smooth running of the economy: security, healthcare, education, public infrastructure, etc. And this happens on the trust that government is going to take away these resources from the private sector, from the individuals, and use them for the common good. So it's very, very important to strengthen the social contract between government and the public. The fiscal policy and how it is managed, how it is coordinated with other policies, including monetary policy, then plays a very, very important role. Once the government collects these taxes, it now deploys them to the public services, the infrastructure, the defense, etc. Every person in South Africa cannot have their own defense. We can have private police, private security, etc. But overall defense, that will not be possible. Public infrastructure, all the roads, the highways, not every individual, every company can have their own highways. Otherwise, you'll have duplicity. So you need this public figure who is the government to provide these services. Now, fiscal policy, if well managed, can really play a very critical role in supporting economic growth, supporting employment, supporting social sector development through the public services, the education, the health. And it also is very, very important in providing standards, quality standards, along which the private sector will play. Managing monopoly issues, managing trust, antitrust issues are all very, very critical. So you need the government to play these roles at the central and at the municipal level and at the local levels. Very, very important. How the two play, of course, fiscal policy has its challenges, especially when you have corruption, you have state capture, you have resources meant to play the public good, but now playing the private good for a few. All those create challenges. the need to have that sense of public sector serves the public good is very, very important for the fiscal policy to play its role in facilitating economic growth, facilitating employment, facilitating equal distribution of resources. This is one key player of the fiscal policy, ensuring equal distribution of resources, looking at vulnerable communities, situations of shocks where the economy may not be running, or some sections of the population not receiving the same resources, etc. Fiscal policy helps to level out some of those challenges. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. And truly, from the sentiments or perspective that you're sharing, that it's most important role it will then relate to public services that are then being provided, like defense. Not everybody can afford defense. I think it's the most expensive now service that can be provided if you have to have your own personalized security or defense and so forth, as well as infrastructure as well, because we depend on these various infrastructure for business activities to then happen. Thank you very much for sharing those perspectives. Maybe I'll also open this question maybe to the floor and open up to some of our esteemed guest speakers in terms of sharing, in terms of what is their perspective, in terms of the role that the fiscal policy then plays in terms of driving that inclusive economic growth in Africa as a whole, even if we can narrow it down to South Africa. If maybe I can get some maybe similar perspectives, or something different.
I just want to pick up on what Dr. Paul was talking about in terms of what fiscal policy can and is supposed to do. I also want to just say that fiscal policy as well, if implemented correctly, can start generating income, because government is not supposed to crowd out private investment expenditure, but support what the economy can do. I want to pick up on something that came up in SONA, as well as the budget speech, Operation Vulindlela, those 5 items that they were talking about in terms of where we are at and what it is that is doing to ease up on the constraints. One of the problems that we've been talking about in South Africa, most economists were referring to, was the infrastructure constraint, that the economy has to be restructured so that it can actually generate GDP, help generate GDP growth that is above 3% or above a level which can actually create employment. And I think we all know the 5 pillars of Vulindlela, but I just want to pick up on one, and today is not a good day to pick up on that one, because the first milestone that they said they passed was stability in electricity generation. And how does that impact the economy? If you are a manufacturing business or a small manufacturer and you didn't know when load shedding was going to happen, or you had already gone to an extent that you can't stop the batch that you were doing. Load shedding was one, it drained confidence, business confidence. It also repassed confidence in how the South African economy can also be an attractive destination for foreign investors. So today is not a good day to pick up on that one, but generally since the 27th of March last year, load shedding has, I think we can say that we have seen a huge improvement in terms of the stability in electricity generation. The other one was also the fact that the unbundling of Eskom, so that they can see where the problem lies. Is it in transmission, generation, and production, and so forth? That has proceeded quite well. The other one that people were mentioning a lot last year was the road infrastructure, the freight, the ports, and so forth. For if you are a mining company and you wanted to get coal to Richards Bay, you have a contract in China or wherever your export destination is. The fact that coal production could happen and you couldn't get it to the coast because one, we know that Transnet had issues. The private sector, public sector partnerships that is underway to make sure that the rail network works because it's cheaper than taking it down to Richards Bay by truck. When you do that, you know what happens to the road. The roads were not designed to carry heavy freight. Heavy freight was supposed to be transmitted by Transnet, and it was being transported by the rail. You damage the road, it's more expensive for anyone to export by road instead of rails. You remember the riots and in the N3 when there were now mafias trying to intercept that. And when you get the coal to the coast, the backlog was up to 6 weeks. They've generally reduced that. So that's why I'm saying fiscal policy and partnership with the private sector also starting to work. The other one is in the increase in the digital spectrum, making it data cheap, because you know that the economy these days is mostly driven by and enabled by data, and South Africa's data was quite expensive. That is still to come, and also getting skills underway. Skills import into the country underway, relaxing the visa regime. That's what fiscal policy does. Those are policies that government can come up with. The last one that I would just want to lift up is the water. They want to do something like the road network, where you have something similar like the water. Water is a problem, particularly in a city like Johannesburg. One, the repair of leakages. That's local government. Strengthening local government is part of fiscal policy. As Dr. Paul was saying, fiscal policy talks to looking at things like, is the local government working? Because that's where service delivery takes place. Is the provincial government working and delivering service? You have to have people who are skilled enough and not working for the public good, as he said, and not for 17 people who benefit from a tender that was supposed to cost 500,000 and now it's costing 80 million, so that people can get their share of whatever. But if you look at the tenets of Operation Vulindlela, those 5 things, I think that's where you can say, I see some commitment and some execution in terms of fiscal policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. And I truly appreciate your insights. I think you were touching so much in some of the topics that I would also discuss on the side with friends and families in terms of issues of transportation, coal not being transported by Transnet anymore, the use of trucks, whether there is issue of, mafias and being involved in terms of, not using Transnet anymore and now moving away, or is it an issue of capacity from Transnet, or is it an issue of trying to grow a different aspect now, a different sector now, using trucks and so forth. You've touched so much in terms of some of the issues, burning issues that we are still facing, and correctly so. Probably we might be seeing now at least Eskom trying to start providing a service that we would then expect, from the standard of the company as large as it is. Thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe I can take one more person, maybe from our esteemed colleagues, in terms of the role of fiscal policy when it comes to inclusive economic growth, and then we can then move on from that question. If there's anybody who would like to share, yes, Mr.
Yeah.
Frank.
I'm looking at the tenets of Operation Vulindlela and its economic infrastructure development. So my question is just the following: why have our government let the infrastructure go to waste, and why is our railroad not working? Why do we find ourselves in a situation where we need to redevelop it when it was functioning? So it's like, for me, it's a question of when you ask someone to invest money on your behalf, let's say as a private citizen, and an investment capacity let's say, and you do investments, and your investment manager comes to you and say, "Oh, I've invested in this project, and the project is it's bankrupt, and we go and try to get 50 cents out of the rand, or maybe 1 cent out of the rand fee." It's like you will not find that acceptable, but yet the taxpayers has to find it acceptable that our infrastructure has been dilapidated. That is unacceptable. In no way is that acceptable. I don't even want to ask the question why we have a discussion about this, because you are entrusted with our funds as the public, as the taxpayers, and you have not delivered the services that you should be. Job creation is other thing. I don't believe it's the work of government to do job creation, to be honest. It's job creation is done by the private sector in an environment that government creates for business to thrive. Jobs is not the goal. Jobs is a consequence. You employ people because you have a, let's say you have a Toyota that's opening up here, or a Ford manufacturing here, and it's going to export to, let's say, the US, which is now under threat with their AGOA and everything going on. But the idea is the companies put their capital here because they can raise a profit for the stakeholders, and you employ people as a consequence. It's not you create jobs and then it's just like the government should enable the environment for businesses to want to thrive in and put their money here. It's like capital is the same as water. Water flows to the least resistance, the path of least resistance. And when capital is coward, so in that sense, capital will always flow to the place where it makes the easiest return for the shareholders. Hence, we have the trade wars. We know China has, in a real world example, China has manipulated the currency to a certain extent to be competitive internationally, and also made it expensive in the US to manufacture because of the demand for dollars. So the dollar remains strong because of the clearing mechanism. The other part's like you will see money flowing to China because it's let's say easier to manufacture. The regulations are, the business environment was easier to create business, and therefore they've grown the economy. And if you look at that, it's never the work of government to create jobs. It's the private sector that creates employment opportunities within the environment that the government creates with the correct policies that enable the job creation to happen. For me, it's really concerning as an economist that we get our president on the sauna and in the budget speech lauding 28 million grant recipients. That is shocking and a concern. That is not something to boast about. That's abhorrent, to say the least. I'm sorry. I'm not a socialist. I'm not a communist. I'm a capitalist economist, and I might be a bit bearish, yes, but in essence, we need to ask the tough questions. Why do we talk about education? We spend per capita one of the highest figures in education with one of the lowest results. Why? It's like we need to ask these tough questions. Like Mr. Blessing said, we kicked the can down the road long enough now. Now we're at the dead end of the wall, and now we need to ask some serious discussions. Listen, as a taxpayer, this is not acceptable, and it's not acceptable. If I look at, I've actually searched it in the tenants and put them here just to refresh my mind. It's like we can't go on the way we do. It's like we need to broaden the tax base, and to broaden the tax base, you need businesses to invest in South Africa, so you must make it investable. So then you get people to have jobs, and then you can have broaden your tax base, so you can do more. So it's this chicken and egg situation. I don't describe that. It's like how does Forrest Gump say? Stupid is as stupid does. So you can't do completely against market policies and businesses and then expect the economy to grow. It doesn't work that way. It's like saying I want to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you visit McDonald's every day, twice a day. You're not going to look that way because you don't do the stuff. Sorry, but yeah, that's for me. For me, economics and policy is quite logical, and if you look at, let's say, the utopias of socialism and capitalism, or let's say socialism, why don't our esteemed politicians go and live in North Korea or Venezuela, for that matter? Why don't they pack the bags and go and live there? Because it doesn't work. The market needs the invisible hand of the market. Like Kane said, that's the way that you guide your economy to better policy, to get more businesses, to create more jobs, to broaden your tax base, to do the deliverables for the people that's vulnerable and destitute and lift them out of poverty, much like China did. Smart.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Fred. You're sharing a different and fresh perspective as well. Yeah, you've mentioned issues that related to the infrastructure. We as the taxpayers, we still have infrastructure that's not in a good standard. You've mentioned something related to railways. And some of the questions that I also still ask myself is, why are we still not connected in terms of railways, where you can move in between different countries in Africa, and still an issue that needs to be addressed. You've mentioned issues of, or question of ease of doing business. Been mentioned as one of the countries where ease of doing business, it's not very much easy to do business here. And Dr. Paul, just before I let you then go, I just want to direct this question briefly, from you, in terms of what are the African Development Bank's key strategies when it comes to addressing inequality through the fiscal intervention.
Thank you very much. Just to align with what Fred is saying, and in answering that question, the role of the government in fiscal policy is really to facilitate growth, to facilitate the private sector, to create that environment, an enabling environment where the investors can be attracted to a country. So creating the right infrastructure, the right policy framework, so that the private sector thrives. And the government needs to listen to the private sector, because they are the big players when it comes to employment, when it comes to generating economic activity and creating the room for additional taxes. Now, how does the African Development Bank come into this picture? The African Development Bank generally, in most of the time, most of the countries in the continent, supports infrastructure development as a key enabler for growth. So we provide funding for roads, for railways, for energy generation. We provide technical assistance and technical support and policy dialogue with the government to discuss these issues, to create room for the private sector to emerge and grow. We provide general budget support, which goes to the government to create that space, the fiscal space for the private sector, for the government to support those activities, those investments that are going to provide to support the private sector. Then we also support the private sector directly with lending and technical support and guarantees so that the private sector can thrive. Broadly, those are some of the areas. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul, for sharing some of those insights from the African Development Bank perspective. And I would like to then move on in terms of our questions, and I would like to look at some of the current economic trends, and some of the case studies that we've been seeing from different companies, and as it were. And I would like to pose this question to Ms. Tendai, Manchimula. I would want to and pose this particular question to you in terms of, from your experience within the financial sector, how have the recent economic shifts influenced corporate strategies? It could be from where you currently are working now at Liberty, or maybe from a broader perspective in terms of the industry.
Yeah. Once again, my name is Tendani, not Tendai.
Tendani. I've known a colleague with a similar name. Okay, Tendani.
Yeah, thank you. So it depends on what you're referring to as the current shifts. in the economy, because I think what business does or the industry does and should do is whatever economic circumstance you find yourself in, you have to make your way around that. We in South Africa right now, what we're facing and which is going to impact on business is what are the opportunities and the challenges that are posed. For instance, let me pick one thing. We've been on an easing monetary policy for the past few months. Our view is that that easing is going to come to an end soon. I think there's probably still perhaps a 25 basis points cut that is still left. We've seen the inflation number that came out this week. It's weaker than expected. But as I said, the Reserve Bank in the statement last time cited uncertainty in terms of global events that would impact on South Africa. In the various economists will tell you there are different perspectives in terms of what a full 30% tariff on South Africa could do in terms of impacting the economy, and that's on the negative side. So one, the 25 basis point in terms of saying that the easing, if that is going to come, maybe in the next meeting, or one more point that is still going to come. One, what I know about the economy in South Africa is that when you cut interest rate as a measure of stimulating economic growth, you impact mostly those people that have an exposure in terms of debt. So if I have a bond, if I have a car that I'm servicing, the debt that I'm servicing, that's going to impact that, because I'm going to, at least it's easier for me and my disposable income increases, and that income is going to spend on the economy and is going to grow. For us, it means that consumers with more disposable income can buy our products, because that's where you are at. However, for the majority of South Africans, because you do not service that market that has an exposure to interest rate, you service the general population where financial inclusion is a real challenge. What is going to happen? What are we seeing in terms of a shift in that, in terms of monetary policy, is that you have to make products in such a way that they meet the needs of all South Africans and not only a niche. Depending on who you talk to, they'll tell you that the tax base, in terms of where the government really generates its revenue, is very small compared to the rest of the South African population. And that is a challenge, because that is the market which most affluent businesses who are exposed to the affluent business sector are exposed to. So for us, it's looking at, yes, easing monetary policy, more disposable income, but what sector of the economy is exposed to that, and what products can you offer to those people that whether interest rate is 25% or 30%, it doesn't matter to my income, because in any case, there's products that are developed by the formal market sector do not include me because I do not qualify. So that's number one. In terms of the shifts, if we're looking at something like the tariff impact that might come through to the country, where if it impacts economic growth, definitely is a concern for us, because already we're sitting with an unemployment rate that is unacceptably high. So for us, the best scenario would be an economy that grows, lowers the unemployment rate, the absorption rate into the economy is much higher than what it is, which I think was around 41% absorption. So meaning that if I walk out of university today, the chances of getting a job in the formal sector are slim compared to, let me just call out the BRICS economy, because that's the economic bloc that we belong to. Compared to those people, we don't have that same absorption rate. Secondly, the savings ratio in the comparable economy, in the BRICS economies, is much, much higher. So people tend to save more in that. I am in an industry which encourages savings. Contractual savings is what we do, because you have a contract, you save on a month-to-month basis. At least a lot of people adhere to that. But what you will see, if there's a shift in the economy, like if the economy is going to, is not going to grow as quick as it should, the rate of salary increases decreases, because remember, if your negotiation with your employer is that your salary increase is linked to inflation, right now, if you're seeing lower inflation, you are going to have that. But the problem is that most employers would look at headline inflation and not look at items within that basket, which are quite high because they offset each other. So that one would also be an impact to us. We would look at that, because then you'd see that people are impacted by their disposable income is impacted for industry, and not necessarily the industry that I come from. For any consumer in South Africa, those things, those shifts, the easing of monetary policy, the way the economy grows, how my salary is going to increase is a challenge. The other thing also as well, if I want to compare us moving away from the saving ratio, because South Africa's household saving compared to the BRICS economy, for instance, is much, much lower than that. We don't have a saving culture. As a result, you see it in the household debt to GDP ratio, which is quite high. It's in the 70s, meaning that a lot of consumption in South Africa is serviced by debt. Now, you cannot use debt to buy an insurance policy. You can't buy it on credit. That could perhaps benefit the retail sector of the economy. But for services where you have to use your income to do that, high debt service cost does not bode well for us. So those are the shifts, if I can just summarize from a monetary and economic perspective, that would impact the industry that I come from, not necessarily the company, the industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was also not aware in terms of how the economic growth then how it does. It also has an impact, or a direct impact, in terms of salary increases. And thank you very much for sharing that. And I think you've shared also some great perspectives in relation to savings culture, when we're comparing ourselves with, want to say, some of our partners, like some of the countries within the BRICS. As we, as South Africans, we might not have that much of savings culture. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think we don't have Dr. Paulina in the call, because I had some questions. Oh, you're here now. You managed to join.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paulina. It's lovely to then have you. I did indicate and share your apologies in terms of that you might join a bit late, but thank you so much for joining us. We truly appreciate it. I want to then pose a question then to you. I want you to share some perspective in terms of what are the main economic indicators that specifically your industry watches in terms of assessing the industry health. If you can just.
Yeah, and good evening to everybody. Pardon me for being late. I did tune in, but I was still in motion. You can see I just came in and threw over the jacket in this cold weather. Perhaps just on a bit of a lighter note, I thought, gosh, this conversation is so interesting. And I paused, not making contributions, to listen, because I think all the different elements that the colleagues have been speaking to actually do impact on our industry. So for the context of people that are in the room, I'm from NAMSA, which is the Automotive Business Council. So I think at the central of the current, both domestic and global trends, we find ourselves doing the cha-cha there. There's a song by Dave Koz and BB Winans, if I'm not mistaken, that says, I could have missed the pain, but I would have missed the dance. And I think we find ourselves in a very interesting time. One of the things that I communicate is that we're living in unprecedented times. The concept in economics of ceteris paribus, all things constant, is not applicable anymore. It's not business as usual. So I think there's just so many moving parts. And one of the reasons also that I ran late into the meeting was because we were just in a meeting discussing a global regime or trade regime, which you would know it is our relationships with the US. And I think it comes at a very crucial and an interesting time. But perhaps maybe just to paint a picture into your question, because I think our section speaks mainly to case studies, and I think the automotives is quite a very interesting one to look into, because with all that we've discussed, both from a monetary policy to fiscal policy to the global trade policies as well, it impacts significantly. So maybe let me paint a picture so that people can understand. Dr. Paul mentioned something interesting about how private sector plays a significant role in terms of the contribution or into the economy. So I thought it might be interesting to paint a picture as well, because I don't want to make the assumption that everyone in the room is an economist. So maybe before even delving into the different indicators and why they matter, let me paint who we are as an industry and why that matters. Because here's the thing, we've analyzed now in our conversation fiscal policy and monetary policy from what government should be doing. But perhaps we need to tilt it a bit to look at it bottom up. What are the social ills that we need to be responding to? And now, when we look at different industries, and I mean, Freddie mentioned it as well, to say from a capitalist perspective, what are the different industries able to do to help address our socioeconomic challenges? Tendani just spoke about it earlier on, about our unemployment levels, etc. What are industries able to do that? So let me just paint a picture, and I'll just share a couple of 2023 figures. So when we look at, maybe let me start on employment. I think there's a huge conversation around unemployment. The automotive sector, just in 2023, employed 497,000 people. That's just to paint a picture on the significant impact it makes in terms of employment. When we look at its GDP contribution, it contributed about 5.3% in that regard. We looked at investment of over 14 billion in that year. And when we looked at what we were able to generate from a Forex perspective, we earned about 270.8 billion rands. So, and as South Africa as a sector, we export to over 148 countries, and we have increased that to 155 in 2024. So I'm just painting a picture to say, this is the immense nature in which the industry contributes. Now, when we look at, which is something, a conversation in South Africa, industrialization and value addition, a lot of what South Africa has seen over time is that we have been trading in raw commodities. When we look at mining, as much as it's a key performance contributor to GDP, when we look at agriculture, the majority of what they trade is raw commodities. You look at automotives and its catalytic nature. It's the one industry that's able to bring in raw, convert it into a value-added product, and actually export. When it comes to technology, when it comes to skills development, it is a crucial sector. So I'm painting this picture to understand that when I speak about the indicators that matter to us, it's beyond us saying how many cars do we sell. But if we are speaking about how many cars do we sell, we are speaking to how many jobs do we create, how many people livelihoods do we improve. Maybe while still on that, and I liked hearing a story because I think it's stories that have shaped South Africa's narrative. Our automotive industry is built into clusters. We've got in Gauteng the likes of Roslyn, we've got the likes of Silverton, etc. We've got in the Eastern Cape a cluster of economic production then in KZN. Now, these industries actually anchor a whole economy. The lady that sells magwinya at the end of the street sells them because there's somebody that's employed that passes by and actually buys from them. So the catalytic nature goes beyond just the production of vehicles, but it talks about people that have actually supplying into the clothing and textiles. It actually ties into those entire economies. So when our fiscal policies, trade policies, and monetary policies actually impact on these negatively, it's not just on vehicle sales. It actually impacts a whole economic and regional economies and industries. Now I'm going back to your question to say, which indicators do we usually look at? So I know Tendani did touch on a few of them. Real wage growth. There's no particular order. Real wage growth as an example, when people are actually not just getting salary increases, but maybe when we have an easing monetary policy, meaning a reduction in interest rate, it improves disposable income, etc. That for us becomes an economic and significant indicator, because then people have more disposable income. And because economics is a science of human behavior, just because somebody has a little bit of disposable income, for us it matters, because then people start considering other goods that go beyond just the bare necessities, but they're able to consider things for us like vehicles. And that for us also improves the significant indicator, which we report on regularly, which is vehicle sales. And I've explained how it ripples back. So when we look at our monetary policy, and I wanted to just weigh in on that to say, we saw, Tendani made a good reference to it, we saw monetary policy easing. But then with the budget speech and what happened today, which again, I think we're glad that it was put to a halt, then we see a monetary policy which now conflicts with fiscal policy. And yet we are arguing a conversation of economic growth. So the question is that, from which base does South Africa actually argue its economic growth? And if you are going to be implementing policies that are actually in conflict with each other, how are we expecting the economy or our citizens to actually respond to that? So real wage growth becomes a very significant trend that we continue to track, that these economic indicators also impact on it largely. And for us, it matters because when our consumers' pockets are healthy, then we know that our industry also is able to thrive. We also look at the middle class outlook. We've spoken about high unemployment figures in South Africa. For us, beyond people going into employment, but when we see people moving into this class of middle class, it becomes very significant for us, because when we look at vehicle purchases, this is where actually they emanate from. The middle class are more able to afford, and we are able to see growth in that segment. So the interesting thing, and these are tales that we can delve into as well, is that in 2024 as an example, we then saw a lot of vehicles that were sold being priced under 500,000. What picture does that paint then in the South African context? It's an affordability crisis. And my colleagues have already touched on it to say, we find ourselves in an economy that hasn't been growing. It's been growing in less than 1% over the past couple of years. So people love the luxuries that we produce, which is vehicles, etc., and that we sell. But I think when it comes to how they can afford, that becomes a crucial factor. And that is why, which is a conversation that I believe questions will emanate from, we have seen that a lot of these cars that have been coming in, I don't want to mention the country, but coming in under 500,000, a lot of people have been going in that direction to purchase it. So other economic indicators that we look at is, of course, overall GDP growth, because that also talks about the strength of a country to be able to produce and, of course, sell its products and services. We've also been looking at other allied industries. So when we represent vehicles, automotives, we're not just representing the cars that we drive, passenger vehicles. We also represent the trucks and buses. We call them medium and heavy commercial vehicles. So when an allied industry like construction is growing, then our trucks are being purchased. So we also look at those indicators to see how to grow. Mining as well, like my colleagues mentioned, that we have been moving a lot of our goods on road. So when we talk about our exports or our movement of goods of raw commodities in mining as well, this impacts significantly on sectors like the medium and heavy. Manufacturing as well is also a key indicator. We talked about, and I'm running through this quickly, the energy stability in our country. That in fact impacts significantly on our production. I think also Tendani made an example to say, as an SMME who's supplying components into a BMW, if you didn't anticipate a power cut and that cuts, then it means you're not able to service your orders. That means that our OEMs can rather go to another supplier or even import. That kills your business. So that becomes a critical growth driver. Global commodity prices is one thing that we look at as well. Oil performance, it impacts on fuel. If fuel is too high, people don't like buying cars. Similarly, if energy security is unstable, Eskom's performance, people say, hey, I'm not going into these electric vehicles. Infrastructure investment, we talked about it. The blockages that we see on the roads in moving goods. have created quite a crisis, and we have been trying to engage. We've now signed an MOU with Transnet to say, how do we improve this infrastructure so that we are able to move our goods and services? Now, a very interesting conversation that we've also seen, the policy and political reforms, the GNU, it becomes quite crucial because most of our OEMs, we know that they are foreign based. And I think the policy stability becomes very crucial in order to be able to attract investment. And then this one is not last and least, is the global economic reforms. We've been doing the cha-cha with the US now with all these tariffs and how it has impacted us. And this becomes a crucial indicator. What is happening on a global scale? Because our industry is of a global nature. Actually, 60% of what is produced in South Africa, the vehicles that are produced in South Africa, are for the export market. So imagine if the US has imposed 25% tariffs, it means that that market obviously is shrinking. Then what does that mean in terms of us being able to sell vehicles? I'll give you an example. We've got an OEM that, though it may produce over 30,000 vehicles, etc., per year, only 4% of it are sold locally, and the rest are sent to a foreign market. So imagine if that 96% is actually impacted by tariffs, then it impacts the feasibility of this OEM still locating here. It impacts jobs, etc., and that becomes a crucial indicator. I've spoken about fuel prices, and I wouldn't want to recycle my colleagues' words, but interest rates, inflation, VAT for us was a pain point, because now somebody's thinking, if I want to buy a car for R1 million, then I have to top it up with this one, because VAT is an early on taxation that is put on a price. So these are some of the economic indicators that become crucial to us, and I'm happy to unpack them. But in the interest of time, I'm just pausing on this to paint a picture, to say what is happening globally and domestically has really kept us on our toes. And of course, given the significance and the impact that the automotive industry plays, we're constantly saying, what does this then mean? And how do we then respond to it? Not just so that our companies remain profitable, but also thinking of the bottom line and the economic impact of these communities that they continue to service. So let me pause there. I have a story. I love the industry, so I can talk the whole night. But let me pause there and allow people as well to simmer in what I've said, and I'll be open to questions as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paulina. It was truly a mouthful, and thank you so much for that contribution and perspective. And you've mentioned something that, when we start studying economics, the word ceteris paribus is always there. And now you've thrown it out of the window to say things are no longer the same now. We're not keeping things the same anymore. Things are changing, things are moving. We're indicating in terms of issues related to the taxation. If there was an increase and you were happy, delighted in terms of it being paused or being reversed, if the increase came in, it would probably impact hugely in terms of your market, especially from a South African perspective, that you have indicated that around 4% of those vehicles would then be, bought, locally, and it's a fresh perspective, it's a fresh learning, and it's something different, from us. And you've mentioned issues of tariffs. Imagine if all those particular countries were to impose tariffs, it means that we might be facing an issue in terms of an automotive industry perspective, in terms of cars being bought and the pricing and so forth. Thank you very much for those perspectives. Yes.
I have a question, which I think might also help the audience. So Dr. Paulina, two maybe. I know you said 60% is destined for exports of production in South Africa. Of that, I just wanted to understand how much goes to the US. And if at all NAMSA is seeing opportunities in terms of the tariffs being posed. I know you've mentioned the problems, but are there opportunities that you are seeing that would eventually help the economy going forward? Percentage of cars going to the US and opportunities that you're seeing in the tariffs.
Through you, Chair, if I can respond, is that okay?
Yes, please, briefly.
And then interestingly, though it gives us creeps, I also celebrate it because it's a pull and push and pull dense effect. So, for example, let me put it this way. Of the 60% that goes to export market, the US 2024 figures, and I like accuracy, maybe I'm a bit of a numbers person, 6.5% went to the US as an export market. But remember, when it comes to value terms, that's quite significant. Why? Because the US has an appetite for luxury vehicles. And what South Africa sends to the US is those luxury vehicles. Now, let me also paint this picture. So when we looked at the performance last year, entire exports went down by 2.2%. And then all the other regions globally actually impacted or created a dent in terms of impacting that overall export performance. There were only two markets that had an uptick. It was the US that it went up by 22.2%. So in 2023, we actually took 20,910 units. In 2024, we took 25,553 units. The second market was Africa. And that Africa, we sent, it went up by about 2.2%. All the other regions of the world went down. But interestingly, when we look at our biggest export market, it is Europe. Europe, we sent volumes over 250,000 units. The reason it went down by 1.9% last year is because they are in this zero emissions mandate, which demands that while we were selling, we call them internal combustion engines, while we were selling diesel and petrol cars to Europe, now this zero emissions mandate demanded us to be sending electric vehicles. Are there South African companies that are actually producing that? Yes, they are, but at a minimal base, because our policy, though as part of the South African automotive plan, was meant to be comprehensive, we only spoke about electric vehicles and forgot to look at the comprehensive scope, because there's plug-in hybrids, there's battery electric vehicles, there's hydrogen vehicles. So that is the policy push that we're trying to drive, and I think I will delve into that. So we look at this holistically to say the American market becomes quite crucial. You ask the question, are we seeing opportunities or are we seeing challenges? And that is the meeting that I was in previously, because now with all these tariffs that have been imposed, we were exporting to America duty-free, meaning that we were not paying taxes when we were going into the American market, and hence we were able to send those volumes. Now with these tariffs that have been imposed, of course that will impact. But one of the things that we are trying to look at is what other trade regimes can we leverage? And I mean, there's a whole discussion around it now, there's TIFA, etc., but those are bilateral agreements and they have their own nuances. Now, the question is, we are looking at it comparatively now. We've been leveraging on the US diversity, etc. We're able to send to other markets similar volumes like Asia without bilateral trade agreements. But unfortunately now, the Asians, we know how they are able to produce cars. They don't necessarily need our vehicles like we do. So our key market that we need to capture now is the European market. But that then puts pressure on government, which is the debate we're constantly having, is we need progressive and proactive policy, because otherwise we are falling behind the curve. Because what is happening now is that while we are still thinking, let me produce a battery vehicle for the European market, let me tell you what China did, and I will pause after this, Luyanda. So, yes, yeah. So interestingly, Europe hit China with tariffs on electric vehicles. And then China thought about it. They're like, "Aye, man, these people haven't actually started hitting tariffs on battery vehicles." They converted their normal standard EVs to BEVs so that they tap into that market. If our policy is not yet ready, then it means we are lagging behind the curve. By the time we are ready to move, already we've lost a share of that market. So that's just painting a picture to say, while there are opportunities, there are also other threats, but we need to think diversification then becomes a crucial conversation. Thanks, Luyanda.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paulina. We'll then move to Mr. Blessing. I would like to then, pose this question then to you in terms of sharing your perspective. What microeconomic indicators that small business owners should then regularly monitor?
Thanks, Luyanda. Fantastic. So I think from a business perspective, it does not matter whether you are small or big. So macroeconomics impacts everybody. So it's like saying what should you really monitor from in terms of interest rates. Interest rates will impact everybody. So there is non-negotiables that small businesses need to acquaint themselves with. So firstly, we look at it from the perspective of small business itself to say, small businesses, what do they need? So most times it is the funding. So that is the challenge that most entrepreneurs, when they start their businesses, the issue of funding becomes key. So that is why the interest rate environment is important. From support from government in terms of accessing markets, in terms of trade negotiations, including these issues around tariffs, where government should take the lead. If you are a small business, maybe you are producing a particular brand of wine that you are exporting maybe to Europe or to America, and then you are unfortunate to be caught up in Mr. Trump's tariffs. So government has to then take that lead in terms of how do we create a conducive environment in terms of making our businesses more competitive. And just to tap into what Dr. Paulina was just talking about in terms of when you are thinking of your strategy, other people have thought about it way ahead, like the issue of China, to say China have got 20, 30-year policies that they are already engaged in. When you come back home, when you come back to the South African environment, we are asking ourselves, what do we have as a 30-year plan, as a 50-year plan? I was reading this other article where they were saying China has got a 100-year plan. So when they were saying, China does not always react to what America does because they know in 5 years' time that president is out of power. They are playing the long game. So that's why they don't react all the time. So from a domestic perspective, from a South African perspective, we are asking that same question to say, what type of plans, what long game are we playing? And then on the softer issues, the metrics on the softer issues, things like crime, those do impact your business. So as a small business, your insurance premiums will go up because of maybe the area that you are situated in. So government should maybe think of those special economic zones where small businesses can set up incubation hubs where small businesses can be raised. So there is a myriad of metrics that small businesses can monitor. But I think over and above, the main challenge that keeps small business owners awake is the issue of funding. So funding from a commercial bank perspective, then we talk of interest rates. But then there's also other vehicles that government should be providing for small businesses where they support in terms of funding through the Department of Small Businesses to make sure that entrepreneurs are up and running. Just to close off my contribution, so there was this talk that Elon Musk was giving. So what was he talking about? So he was talking about how he was able to create Tesla, SpaceX, and so forth, and he made a very pivotal comment. He says, I could only have achieved this only in America. Why? It is only in America where you get private sector, the government, channeling the funds or the capital that is in the market towards businesses, towards the risky sectors of the economy to make sure that small businesses are up and running and they are doing well. I know I said that was the last thing, but there was a comment there that someone said, what are the things that Dubai, that Singapore did for them to, to be part of the what you call the developed world in courts? Because it's up to the person who's commenting what developed is. So I'll take Singapore for example. So what did Singapore do? So Singapore looked at the softer issues. What are the softer issues? So all of us have been going round and round discussing issues of corruption. So at what stage do we say this animal of corruption has been arrested in South Africa? So Singapore took a stand to say we are going to deal with corruption. They arrested a number of high-profile ministers. They were sentenced to 20 years, 25-year jail terms. They then said for all civil servants or any roles, positions that we are going to hire someone, it is according to your qualification. So if you're not qualified, you won't get the job. And then they paid them well so that they don't have to think about being corrupt. So that was one of the things that Singapore did. And with Dubai, I'm going to touch on some civil liberties that we have. What are those civil liberties? Every 5 years, we go to the polls. As you all know, Dubai, there's a royal family. You don't get to vote the prince or the king in. So, but what does that translate to in terms of economic development? Of economic development, though it is very an unpopular view, in terms of economic development, when you're coming from a low base, especially in an African perspective, you want to have a person who's in power in the long term. So they have to see their policies out, maybe over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. But in 5 years' time, that person is fighting for re-election. So you find we are focusing on the short term, we never focus on the long term. There's no coherence. So 31 years from 1994, if you try and say, what are the policies that have been coherent, that we have implemented over the years, then that issue of maybe democracy is not very suitable for a country that is starting from a low base. Although I'm a fan for democracy, because the other I've experienced the other side of lack of democracy, and it's not that good, especially if you get someone who's not a visionary. Then it's just going to destroy the country over a longer period of time. But if you get a visionary, you want that person to see out their policies, to see out their vision over the long term. So those are some of the issues that countries like Singapore, Dubai have been privileged, because they don't have to go to election. So they can implement a 25-year policy going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blessing, for sharing that. I think some of the things that I noticed your hand, Mr. Freddy, you indicated issues related to, easy of doing business, in terms of some of the things that small businesses then can monitor. You've also indicated issues related to funding as well, access to funding. Mr. Freddy, I will just give you 30 seconds then, maybe to share your comments, because I would want to also open some questions, a few questions that we can get from the participants.
I want to quickly address some of the questions. One of the climate change questions that was on the question and answer, and I want to answer Mr. Blessing on the democracy, maybe a stable leader for a long time. I don't necessarily agree with that, because if you look at the industrial policy for South Africa that was developed by Hendrik van der Bijl, it was followed by several governments. That was not national lists by any chance from 1922, I think, or 1925, up until I think close to the 1970s. So the industrial plan was a long-term plan that was followed by various governments in South Africa, although apartheid governments, it was a plan that being followed. It doesn't help us if we change plan every 5 years from IPAP, from HOP to GEAR to ASGISA to IPAP into IPAP 2. There's no, you can't change the industrial policy or the economic policy of the country every 4 or 5 years. There's no continuity. Then on the climate change thing, it's like we need to go and decide whether we ascribe to the climate Nazis, because I do not ascribe them, because we have suffered from load shedding at stage 5, which is not pretty, and to adhere to the Paris Climate Accord, which I also don't adhere. I think that's a waste of time and money for developing countries. It means that we need to go back to a stage 5, 6 load shedding. It doesn't help an employment situation, it doesn't help our growth, and it's not for developing countries. Good, if Europe wants to play that game, China's not going to play that game, and India's not going to play that game. So why must we as South Africa play in that game, in that space? I don't think that's the space for us to play in that, when we've got challenges that goes beyond a climate agenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freddy. Thank you also for addressing some of the questions here. Colleagues, I think some of the questions might have been addressed. I will just go and check questions that have not been addressed, and then I would ask our fellow esteemed guest to address some of the questions that you might have here on the Q&A session. I think there was a question from Michael. It reads as, from a policy making perspective, these trade policies created in silos. Why are these why there is such a clash and contradiction of policies? So I think maybe the question isn't related to perspective of monetary as well as fiscal policies in terms of why are we having contradictions as well as clashes and related to those policies. Is there any of our speakers who would want to then address that particular question?
Which question was that again?
The question was, from a policy-making perspective, are these trade policies created in silos? Why there is such a clash and contradiction of policies?
I don't think they are created in conjunction with each other. I mean, what Paulina said, she referred to the fact that we have an easing of monetary policy and VAT was increasing, which is contradictory to each other. I do think they look at things differently. I mean, when they set up the budget speech, I don't think they were actually looking at what the impact is going to be in terms of how that is going to complement monetary policy, which is contradictory to each other. Ideally, it should be complementing each other, particularly for an economy like ours, which is in dire need of support from the consumer perspective so that at least we can get spending going.
Thank you very much. And there was a question also from Anonymous. I think it was directed to Dr. Paulina. The question reads as, have we seen an increase in export to BRICS partners in terms of the automotive and industry? Are we truly benefiting from the BRICS? Dr. Paulina, would you want to take that one?
Yes, I can take that one. So it's interesting. Maybe let me explain that BRICS is more of an economic bloc. So what drives trade is mainly these trade agreements that we have and how we are able to sort of do that exchange and leverage on each other's competitive or comparative advantage. For example, in America, it was driven by AGOA. In Europe, it's driven by the Extended Partnership Agreement. In China, we've got the FOCAC and all that, but it's not necessarily a trade agreement that says this is how much you don't have to pay, whilst other countries have to pay. So the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, that's why there's still negotiations around having those, easing those tariffs or otherwise eliminating tariffs, etc., to be able to facilitate trade. So that's what actually drives trade into the different markets. And like I said, with the AfCFTA making some form of traction, that's why we have seen an increase in Africa. With AGOA, that's why we've seen an increase in the Americas. With the Extended Partnership Agreement with Europe, that's why that's a significant market for us. And I spoke about the policy reforms. So with regards to our BRICS countries, we've seen a lot of vehicles coming from their end. And one of the things that we have been seeing instead of exports per se is investment. And I think also their perspective is that we are coming to invest in the country so that they can leverage our manufacturing base, but drive exports from South Africa. So I think it's that trade relationship that we are currently leveraging on, and investment has been a bigger part of it. Just before I part, India, for example, we bring in over 53.6% of vehicles from there. China is about 13.3%. And I think coupled with that, when you look at investment and even in multiple sectors, we've seen those two BRICS countries and Asian markets continuing to bring in investment into the country. So that's the trade relationship that we've continued to see over time.
Thank you very much. I think I'll take this one last question then for you, esteemed guest speakers, and then we can have our closing remarks quickly. And apologies, we've went overboard with 4 minutes already. I will just take 1 minute each in terms of closing remarks. So the question is also from Anonymous. It reads as follows. As the only African member in both BRICS and G20, South Africa has a unique institutional access. What practical approaches should South African businesses and government adopt to leverage these dual memberships while navigating competing trade blocks? Do we have any one from our esteemed? Yes.
Actually, if we take the truth, the BRICS and the G20 are not trading blocks. They are a grouping of countries of similar interests, similar likes in terms of levels of development. You know, the G20 is the group of 20 biggest economies, including the EU and the African Union now. When you look at the BRICS, this is a phrase that was coined by some economists looking at Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now a number of other countries have also joined, but they are not brought together by a trading bloc like the SACU or the SADC or the East African Community. So what South Africa can benefit from these groupings is mostly on the policy side and engaging, discussing, like now South Africa is chairing the G20 and leading on policy issues that impact trade. Where can South Africa benefit more is the African Continental Free Trade Area. Focusing more on intra-Africa trade, I think, will be a good opportunity for South Africa. But we need to do a couple of things. Build cross-country infrastructure, strengthen the economies of the continent so that there is more consumption from the member countries and from within. This will be very, very critical. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. Much appreciated for those insights. I think we'll then move forward to our closing remarks. I will then allocate at least maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute max for each of our esteemed guest speakers to maybe have closing remarks. I'm seeing Mr. Freddy as in my screen, or do you want to go ahead, Dr. Paul, since you have the mic, and then you can have closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Reggie and Nisis, for this conversation. Very, very useful, and I think enriching. I've learned a lot from my fellow panelists. I think the role of the government in terms of managing fiscal policy, managing monetary policy, managing trade policy, managing industrial policy, managing employment policy is very, very critical. And looking at this whole spectrum, addressing market failures, facilitating growth, addressing economic cycles when we have dips in economic growth, and addressing shocks, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, addressing some of these challenges that emerge from outside now, like the tariff issue, etc. The role is very, very critical. And the government needs to be there to provide the environment for private sector growth, to address challenges that emerge from competition, ensuring fair competition, ensuring fair play by all economic actors, and ensuring that there is equitable distribution of the national resources. Very, very important. The private sector has an important role in promoting employment, promoting the supply of goods, and the quality of those goods, and also the diversity of those goods, so that consumers have unlimited choice when it comes to their needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. Truly appreciated. Mr. Freddy?
Yeah, thank you for this, Genesis, for the opportunity to have a discussion about this. Like Dr. Paul said, I guess fiscal policy and monetary policy and trade policy, as well as industrial policy, remain critical for any government to function. And like some other commentator here, I think it was anonymous, said that it feels like some of the policies are created in isolation or silos, like the gentleman or gentlewoman or lady put it. So I guess we can we can work more together as a government, or the government less silos. And I agree with the other speakers who said we need some maybe develop more the economies of Africa with more cross-border trade and strengthening our continental trade, which there's a huge opportunity. Africa's got a young, vibrant youth, and maybe that's something that we can leverage off. We just need to get the economies and economic development up and running so we can facilitate growth for the African continent based on African trade by Africans for Africans. That's my closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Freddy. And Dr. Paulina, you're also on my second screen. Just quick 30 seconds.
Thank you so much. I started with a song, so it's only fair to close with one. There's a song by Michael Jackson that says "Men in the Mirror." And I think as we navigate the challenges that we face, let's also take the responsibility to say, what's my role in my current sphere? I've had the appreciation of working for government, and now I'm working for industry. And I think we need to be able to incorporate our speak of forms of thinking, and I'll run quickly through them. We need to appreciate both worlds so that in our contribution in our different spheres, we know what input we can make, but we also know how we can support where there are gaps, because any forward moving of an economy includes a collective. It cannot be done by one individual, one segment. Systems thinking, everything plugs into everything. Critical thinking, we need to be bold enough to ask the why. Why is this happening? Understand the context. What are the challenges? And not be afraid to unpack those. Strategic thinking, we need to think, what is it that matters to us as a nation, and navigate from that. And analytical thinking. So I think over and above, if we continue to foster that in our learnings, in our work environments, we'll be able to shape it positively. Over and above, thank you so much. Truly enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paulina. And Mr. Nandi.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was really a useful conversation. I walk away a bit encouraged when I had what the practical experiences from NAMSA is a big player in the economy. However, what I would like to see from government is leadership in terms of what next for South Africa Incorporated, given where we are in terms of trade challenges. We have external challenges. What can we fix internally before we blame everything else on external factors? Let's fix our local government. That's where service delivery happens. Provincial government, get skilled workers in there, and get government sorted, and policy stability so that the private sector can do what it does best, as Paulina indicated.
Thank you very much. Mr. Blessing?
Thank you, Leander. So thank you so much for hosting this session. Really appreciated the panelists, very insightful discussions. I think the time did not do justice to some of the topics that were being raised. So I think in the future, if we can have this for a little bit of a longer period of time, and then we can zero in on some of the pertinent issues raised. I think from my end is just to say, look, as Africa and as South Africa, we have always been playing catch up. So we are talking of production, we are talking of trading with other countries and so forth. But issues like technology, issues like artificial intelligence, issues like machine learning, issues like robotics. So we need to have a coherent plan that we then say, this is what we are focused on. In 20 years' time, 25 years' time, we want to be the leader, maybe the leader in semiconductor production. Why is it that Taiwan is producing all the semiconductors of the world? We can be the leader in that. So we have to take a position instead of just playing catch up and negotiating trade terms and so forth. Let's just have a coherent policy, and then we stick to that, put our heads down until we achieve our policy. Thank you very much. Otherwise, lovely discussion.
Thank you very much. And thanks to you all, esteemed panelist members, guest speakers, and thanks to our participants. We truly appreciate it. We truly appreciate you taking the time to be here today. meeting with us, having these insightful discussions. I hope there's something that we can be able to take home with and be able to learn from these discussions and from these insights. Until next time, colleagues, with then the powers vested in me as the moderator, I would like to then ask us to then leave this meeting and then disband this particular meeting. And thank you so much, colleagues. We truly appreciate it. Until next time.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.